At times in the last few years, it has seemed like McLaren has produced a new model almost every week. It has been hard to keep up. However, today we've been invited to see something that we are promised is, conceptually at least, rather different to anything they've done before. Resplendent in burnished copper paint, this is McLaren's take on a Grand Tourer. Now the first thing you might be thinking is, well, there was the 570 GT, and yes, that was a bit of a GT. They changed the rear deck of that and sort of some settings. This is a whole different kettle of fish. This is really a much more thorough exercise. This is designed to take on things like the DB11 and the Bentley Continental GT. Now I've wondered in the past why a GT has to stick to that front-engined, possibly sort of 2+2 formula, and this is, well, this is the result when you think perhaps outside that particular GT box. So here are some numbers. We'll get into the detail and nitty-gritty later on. The numbers are 611 brake horsepower, which is 620 PS, 630 Newton meters, which is 465 pounds-foot of torque, top speed of over 200 miles an hour, 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, 0 to 124 miles an hour, which is 200 kilometers an hour, in under 9 seconds, which is pretty serious stuff. Lengthwise, because to me it looks like quite a big car, 4.7 meters long, which is about the same as a DB11, just very slightly shorter in fact. Crucially, price. £165,000 there or thereabouts, the same roughly as a 570S Spider we've been talking about, so you can do the sums for other places around the world. And that's interesting because the look to me is of a car that's much more expensive, to be honest. It's got bits of sports series, so 570 sort of around the lights there perhaps, and then the rest of it I'd say is more akin to perhaps the 720S, but overall there's also an element of perhaps Son of Speedtail about it as well. It's a thoroughly good looking, mature perhaps car. Bigger wheels, so as well, bigger tyres in fact, 20 at the front, 21 up at the rear. And yes, I think it looks like a lot of car really for your £165,000. But crucially, practicality in a GT. So let's have a look around the rear. Don't actually play golf, despite the look of that. And obviously a golf bag in a McLaren, it seems preposterous. And it's also one of those things that people think they don't play golf anymore, but Tiger Woods won recently, so everyone's going to be playing golf again. And you can fit a golf bag in the back of here, as I shall now demonstrate. This is a huge amount of luggage space in the back of this car. You've still got 150 litres in the front, which we're used to, but back here, 420 litres of luggage space. And if we shove those forward a bit, this is your standard sort of EasyJet cabin bag. Of course, you don't need to use EasyJet because you're now going to drive everywhere in your wonderful GT, but should you want to drive to the airport, that fits nice and snugly just in there. It is extraordinary, this huge powered hatchback at the back of the car. It's worth saying that the reason they've been able to get so much more space in here is because the plenum cover is actually 120 millimeters lower. Talking the engine, let's find out a bit more about it and the suspension and all that sort of stuff, and go and sit inside and talk to somebody who knows about it. I should have mentioned that you can even fit 2 sets of skis and boots in the car. With sports equipment, I'm not so sure. Musical instruments, for example, trombone, definitely, cello might be pushing it. Garden equipment, probably as much as a Flymo would slide in. But anyway, enough about awkward luggage. Here's Tom Taylor to talk us through a few interior and mechanical details. Tom, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about the car. Just to explain what it is. So this is your baby, really, isn't it? What's your actual job title for people?
So I'm Global Product Manager for Sports Series and also Grand Tourers.
Right, and presumably the second half of that is a kind of is a new addition to your business cards. Let's talk a little bit about the interior first before we get onto the engine and suspension and stuff, because a big part of something like a Bentley Continental GT, which this would go up against, is the interior and the feeling of luxury. And when I first stuck my head into one of these, the first thing I noticed was, well, the smell of leather for a start, which gives you that feeling, I suppose, that you want.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think we understand well that customers in this segment really looking for luxury, comfort, space. So as you mentioned, the leather, we have Bridge of Weir semi-aniline leather, which is the finest hide level you can put in an automotive application, but also touches like the metal switch gear, which is functional, but also has an element of jewellery about it. So these all, for example, these vent pieces here, they're machined from a solid piece of aluminium, so they're really nice to touch. The perceived value and perceived quality is incredibly important. As I mentioned, the comfort, so the way the seat's been designed, the way the armrests on the doors have been designed, it's all about cosseting you when you're on one of those long journeys that we plan for customers in this car.
Absolutely, and it does feel like there's just a bit more space in here. Sort of, we're both tall people, sort of, and I love their steering wheel as well, which is absolutely beautiful with those paddles behind it. The engine. Let's have a chat about that, because obviously you've got the lower plenum on it, but there's all sorts of other bits and bobs. People will be used to that engine by now. Obviously, it is an engine that we have seen in its sort of fundamental structure before. So what's different about this one? Yeah,
absolutely. So it's the engine, crucial, 120 millimeters lower for the luggage space. That was a key requirement. But there are also a number of other changes. So we've got new pistons, a higher compression ratio. We've got a revised, totally bespoke manifold and muffler setup as well as a totally new turbo for us. And really those changes were aimed at three things. So increasing efficiency, getting that characteristic flat torque curve that people want in a Grand Tourer, and then also the sound. So we know customers in this segment really appreciate a characterful engine note. So to that end, we've engineered the muffler and the exhaust system to give you a bassy V8-like quality to the sound.
So hopefully at this point in the film, we'll be able to hear a little bit of it just starting up. Yeah. So we'll cue that. And now you've heard the sound of the engine. It's noticeably more V8s and more normal V8 sound, is it sort of slightly offbeat perhaps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the majority of that is the manifold, the muffler, as I mentioned, and it's got a really bassy, characterful quality to it, and a slightly, I suppose, offbeat quality as well, which I think.
Is there a reason for that? Can you sort of, is it an engineering sort of?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the reason for that was twofold. It's about the routing for the exhaust with this slightly unusual mid-engine setup where we've really moved everything outboard to create luggage space in the rear. The length as well is important, and in addition we've used what's referred to as a log manifold for effectively efficiency and emissions reasons, but as a nice byproduct of that you get this different sound quality.
The other thing you mentioned the turbos, which are presumably smaller because we've got less torque than say the 720S, which also has the 4-litre variant of the engine to spin up to give you that flatter torque curve. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a low inertia turbocharger, and what that means is that your time to torque, so the throttle response, as you would more commonly know it, is very quick in this car, and that's one of the pieces of hardware that delivers that flat torque curve, which gives you that seamless and smooth response from the engine.
Coming on to the ride quality of the car, I was surprised this hasn't got proactive chassis control, which we've been used to on 720S and MP412C before that. This has got a more sort of normal spring and damper setup in inverted commas, which we've seen obviously on the sports series before. But just explain that, because the ride quality is going to be key to this car, presumably, to give it that GT quality.
Yeah, absolutely. So very important in this segment that you're isolating the occupants from the bumps in the road. It's very key to this car. So what proactive damping control, which is a first from McLaren, what it's doing versus maybe a more conventional adaptive damper is it's sensing the wheel inputs. Rather than just react solely to that, it's actively predicting what the next thing's going to be. So the system is saying, where have I seen this scenario before, and then proactively responding to that. And there's also a learning element to it as well. So as you drive further, the car is also learning about road conditions and how it should respond to them.
So gives a bit of an insight. What's this car going to feel like? Is the steering feel slightly different as well?
Yeah, sure. So the overarching aim for this project was to deliver a car that was refined and comfortable and relaxing to drive when you wanted it to be, but drove like a McLaren when you really want to go for it. So to that end, we have a hydraulic steering system, which is key. You still get that fantastic feedback, but the way the steering has been set up really was focused on straight line stability. So if you imagine a situation when you're on the Autobahn, what you want is a lot of stability and reassurance from the steering system. So the way the force builds up as you turn the wheel is very even and measured, and whereas a sports or supercar, you might want that to feel very quick off the centre. With this car, you've got far more gradual approach to the steering system. But the speed, the overall gearing speed, is the same kind of speed as with a sports series, but the way we've executed that is different. And again, focusing on this segment for low speeds, both the steering and the brakes have been optimised for lower effort at those kind of urban speeds, probably for the first time in a McLaren.
Absolutely. Gear change as well. I've noticed obviously we've got these lovely paddles behind here, but you've retuned the gearbox as well slightly. Yep,
absolutely. So we have a 7-speed dual clutch gearbox, but again, this is behaviour that you can control with the modes, depending on what your mood is. But really, we focus on the length of the opening for the clutch to make sure that you've got a very smooth, very low force shift when you're under part throttle or you're just pulling away, and that gives you a very relaxed sense of progress if you want it to be. Whereas
sort of brings it more in line with perhaps a torque converter sort of.
Exactly. So we've looked at that as well as a benchmark.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's very exciting. I'm very intrigued to see what this car's like out on the road, and hopefully it won't be too long before we find out. So there we are. McLaren is saying that this latest new car sits outside its normal Sport, Super and Ultimate series structure, which is intriguing. I think it looks great. That luggage space is impressive too, and I'm sure it will ride as a Grand Tourer should. However, some things like getting in and out are still very much supercar rather than GT car. At the end of the day, the customers will decide, of course, if this is a direction that McLaren is right to explore, or whether it will prove to be an experiment that is chalked up to experience. I look forward to driving it. Hopefully on a long journey.